Hey everyone! Today let's dive into the interesting history of the Dominican Order, or as it's formally known, the Order of Preachers. It all began back in 1216 when a priest named Dominic de Guzmán founded this Catholic order in France. Dominic's vision wasn't just about sticking to the safety of monastery walls. He wanted something different, an order that went out into the world among the people, preaching and standing up against heresy. With the Pope's approval, the Dominicans were born, and their influence would be felt across Europe for centuries. The Dominicans, who put "op" after their names, that stands for Ordinis Praedicatorum, are an order that includes friars, nuns, and lay members. Their goal? To spread faith through education, preaching, and an intellectual approach to spirituality. The Dominican friars became some of the most educated and well-known theologians and philosophers, leading the charge in the intellectual life of the Middle Ages. And even today they're still around, numbering in the thousands worldwide, with Gerard Timoner III currently serving as the master of the order. They even have some pretty well-known patron saints, including Mary Magdalene and Catherine of Siena. The origins of the Dominican Order go back to a time when monks and priests were starting to leave the cloistered life and move into the bustling streets of medieval cities. Inspired by the model of the early church apostles, the Dominicans and the Franciscans were both mendicant orders that would rely on the goodwill of people to sustain their work while living out in the community. Dominic's approach was unique. He wanted the order to have the structure and discipline of older monastic groups like the Benedictines, but with the freedom to serve among the growing urban populations. What really set the Dominicans apart was their commitment to learning and teaching in the languages that everyday people spoke, known as vernacular languages. Dominic knew that to connect with people, especially to counter movements like the Cathars or Albigensians, they needed not just to preach, but to teach in a way that was approachable and understood by the public. The Cathars, in particular, had a strong presence in southern France, with beliefs that directly challenged Catholic teachings. Dominic tried to counter these beliefs through sermons and teaching, even though it wasn't easy, as the Cathars were deeply committed to their views. Dominic's approach emphasized humility and simplicity, a stark contrast to the grandeur associated with some church officials at the time. And Dominic officially founded the Dominican Order in 1215, but a lot of groundwork had already been laid a year earlier. In 1214, he set up a religious community in Toulouse, operating under the rule of Saint Augustine and what they called the primitive constitution. The whole purpose was pretty clear-cut: to preach and to save souls. This vision wasn't just Dominic's idea though. His approach actually pulled a lot from the Premonstratensians, a reform movement that was all about strengthening community life and discipline. Fast forward a bit to July 1215, when Dominic got the official go-ahead from Bishop Fawkes of Toulouse to organize his followers into a formal religious order. And he wasn't just setting up any religious community. This order was built to be a powerhouse in pastoral ministry, trained, organized, and completely devoted to the work. Dominic chose the rule of St. Augustine as the guiding framework, as his successor, Jordan of Saxony, noted. This rule focused on the salvation of souls through preaching, so it was a perfect fit for what Dominic had in mind. But with this choice, the Dominicans weren't really seen as monks. They were more like canons regular, meaning they could actively minister while living a life of poverty and community. Pope Honorius III officially approved the Order of Preachers in December 1216 and January 1217 through two key papal bulls, Religiosum Vitam and Nos Attendants. Then, on January 21, 1217, another bull, Gratiarum Omnium, declared that Dominic's group had a special, church-wide authority to preach. This was huge because, up to that point, preaching was usually something only bishops could authorize in their local areas. The Dominicans now had a kind of universal green light. For Dominic, study was just as important as charity. He firmly believed that to spread the word effectively, his followers needed a solid understanding of their faith. In August 1217, he sent 7 of his followers to Paris to start a priory focused on study and preaching. which eventually became the order's first university-level school. Dominic would go on to establish similar learning centers at major university towns like Bologna, Palencia, Montpellier, and even Oxford just before he passed in 1221. And now let's look at how the Dominican Order evolved from the time of the Reformation all the way to the French Revolution. One Dominican who really stands out from this period is Bartolomé de las Casas. He arrived in the New World as a settler, but seeing the extreme brutality inflicted on Native Americans by his fellow Spanish colonists changed him profoundly. He became a major advocate for indigenous rights, documenting their rich cultures, especially those in the Caribbean, with a unique depth and empathy. Meanwhile, another Dominican, Gaspar de Cruz, was pushing boundaries in a different way. He traveled across the Portuguese colonial empire in Asia, even reaching Cambodia and China. Though his missionary work didn't yield conversions, his experiences in China led him to write the first European book entirely focused on the country, published around 570. He didn't convert many in Asia, but he did open European minds to new worlds. The Reformation era itself hit the Dominicans hard. Protestantism took hold in many regions, which led to the loss of numerous Dominican convents and communities. Yet, the discovery of the New World also opened new paths for the order. By the 18th century, reform efforts within the order continued, although many Dominicans in their convents were impacted by the ongoing French Revolution, which left some provinces either severely diminished or altogether destroyed. Then there were Dominican scholars and chroniclers like Manuel Joseph de Medrano, who penned a detailed history of the order's activities in Spain, focusing on their notable members and achievements. His work remains a significant record of Dominican history during this time. Moving into the 19th century, despite challenges, the Dominican Order continued to have a substantial number of active friars. They even saw a revival in France, led by the charismatic preacher Jean-Baptiste Henri Lacordaire, who famously wore the Dominican habit in Rome in 1839. This movement brought a new spark to the French Dominican community, leading to the establishment of new provinces and even expanding internationally to places like Canada and the US. French Dominicans had a profound influence, not just in France but beyond. They founded institutions like the École Biblique in Jerusalem, which became a central place for biblical scholarship and produced the famous Jerusalem Bible. They also established centers of learning in Rome, where the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, known as the Angelicum, became a hub for studying sacred sciences. Interestingly, while the order was traditionally enclosed, many convents of Dominican women were encouraged by bishops to take on more active roles in education and healthcare during the 17th and 18th centuries. This practice expanded, especially in the 19th century, leading to the formation of several congregations of Dominican sisters who focused on teaching and missionary work in places like South Africa and even beyond. And their influence wasn't just limited to Catholic communities. The Dominican spirit of preaching and teaching inspired the formation of other orders, including some in the Anglican tradition. Even in the early 21st century, Anglo-Catholic Dominican communities have emerged, adapting the principles of the original order to a different faith tradition. This global reach of the Dominican order continued into Asia. The Pax Mongolica of the 13th and 14th centuries, for instance, allowed Dominicans to venture across vast stretches of the continent. Dominican friars made it as far as the steppes of the Volga and even Persia, Armenia, and India. One of the best known of these early missionaries was Jordanus de Séverac, who traveled to Persia and later to India, where he recorded fascinating insights about the region and its people. Back in the 19th century, Dominicans gained a huge following in the Philippines and established solid missions in Fujian, China, and Tonkin, Vietnam, performing countless baptisms every year. Their influence grew to where they established Colegio de San Juan de Latran, marking their commitment to education. And the Dominicans developed a rich and diverse set of divisions, each playing a unique role in their shared mission. The friars, nuns, and third orders form what's officially called the Order of Preachers. Alongside them are groups like the priestly fraternities of Saint Dominic, Dominican laity, and Dominican youths, all together making up what's known as the Dominican Family. Now, within this structure, the Dominicans also have a unique way of governing themselves. At the top is the General Chapter, which has a lot of authority to create and enforce rules across all Dominican groups. The General Chapter includes two main bodies, the Chapter of Provincials and the Chapter of Definitors. Each group can make legislation and tackle issues affecting the order, but they bring different perspectives to the table. Provincials represent individual Dominican provinces, while the Definitors are essentially grassroots representatives, helping balance the leadership so provincial superiors can still focus on their own communities. One notable thing about their system is that new rules only take effect after being approved by 3 consecutive General Chapter meetings, a way to ensure stability and consistency in their governance. The General Chapter also elects a Master of the Order, who is seen as the successor of Saint Dominic himself. The Master serves a 9-year term, and though they hold significant authority, they're seen as serving the community. They work closely with the General Chapter and oversee various leaders and officials within the order. Among the Dominican branches, the nuns actually predate the friars. They're cloistered and contemplative, meaning they dedicate themselves to prayer and often support their communities by making religious items. The friars, on the other hand, include both priests and non-ordained brothers known as cooperator brothers. They're actively engaged in a variety of ministries, from preaching to social work and education. Friars live according to 4 main pillars: prayer, study, community, and preaching, which guide their lifestyle and purpose. Then there are the sisters, who focus on active service. The structure we see now really took form in the 19th century, and the sisters have a strong presence globally, often involved in teaching and healthcare. Today there are around 24,600 sisters in 150 Dominican congregations across 109 countries, all sharing the same core values. For laypeople who resonate with the Dominican spirit, there are options too. Lay Dominicans are governed by their own rule and play a valuable role in prayer, study, and service. Historically, the Dominicans also developed a strong spiritual focus on learning and charity, shaping a unique brand of mysticism that emphasized a deep, personal connection with God. Humbert of Romans, a 13th century master general, strongly influenced this mystical approach. He advised Dominicans to focus on doing good and maintaining faith without seeking out miracles or visions. Instead, he encouraged them to embrace devotion and goodwill, which he saw as the essence of grace. This focus resonated especially with the English Dominicans, who integrated it into their mysticism, preferring a simple, genuine connection with God over miraculous experiences. Albertus Magnus, another key figure in Dominican spirituality, taught that true understanding and wisdom come from love. His teachings inspired a contemplative approach, where Dominicans saw glimpses of God's greatness, even if fully knowing God remained beyond reach. His influence spread across Europe, inspiring both friars and mystics in their faith. This mysticism had its own flavor in different regions. For instance, in the Rhineland, mysticism took root amid political and social upheaval. Here, mystics like Mechtild of Magdeburg, Hildegard of Bingen, and Catherine of Siena embraced mystical experiences as pathways to God. English Dominicans, however, took a more reflective approach. For them, the journey to know God was less about ecstasy and more about embodying Christ's moral essence. They believed in imitating Christ's life and saw this ethical pursuit as a way to draw closer to God. For these mystics, it wasn't just about having a singular divine experience, but about a lifelong journey of faith and understanding. Christ was the heart of their mysticism, inspiring them to embody his love and compassion. Through all this, the Dominicans maintained a strong sense of purpose and identity, blending their intellectual pursuits, service to others, and a deep-rooted spirituality that remains central to their mission to this day.